Will increased taxes alone cure the nation's deficit spending? Charges have been dropped against the Louisiana Attorney General, and an investigation is being called for. Nashville delays data center development, economic indicators impacting your wallet, and so much more. Welcome to the States, powered by the Center Square. It's Thursday, July 23rd, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. The U.S. House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform met to examine why government shutdowns occur and what role lawmakers should play in preventing them. The Center Square reporter, Christine Johnson, reports committee members examined possible long-term solutions aimed at reducing future funding lapses while minimizing disruptions to government operations and the Americans who rely on federal services. Now, while recognizing that there are rare cases in which they are helpful, Ranking Member Rosa DeLauro said continuing resolutions, or CRs, which provide temporary funding for government services when Congress can't complete the appropriations process, it often makes matters worse, she said. And while there was bipartisan discussion from both sides yesterday, Oklahoma Republican U.S. Senator James Lankford, he highlighted legislation that he and New Hampshire Democratic U.S. Senator Maggie Hassan have been working on since 2019. Lankford said that during a government shutdown, lawmakers, they're still able to leave Washington and return to their home districts. Now, under his proposal, Congress would be required to remain in session 7 days a week, focused solely on appropriations until a funding agreement is reached. Now, Lankford argued that the measure would shift the pressure and consequences of a shutdown away from federal workers and onto Congress, holding lawmakers accountable to reach a solution. California Republican U.S. Representative Tom McClintock yesterday said he supported Lankford's proposal, saying that it would make a simple procedural change by providing appropriations bills with the same expedited consideration in the Senate that reconciliation bills already receive.
Now, this isn't a cure-all. The fiscal decisions attendant to the budget aren't going to get any easier. And since the Senate and House are designed to disagree, it's still going to require intense negotiation between the two houses. But it would at least remove the blockage that often prevents that discussion from taking place, and it reduces the temptation to misuse reconciliation in order to bypass closure.
Now, witness Shalonda Young, former director of the Office of Management and Budget, she said she did not believe Lankford's proposal would be the best solution. Young also opposed automatic CRs, saying that they could give the president more power during budget negotiations and create opportunities for bad actors to delay or manipulate appropriations for political gain. While Young did not present a specific legislative proposal to address these types of shutdowns, she agreed that changes to the government funding process are needed.
These tactics allow the institution to continue to limp along, deepening the dysfunction most Americans now expect. If the goal is institutional restoration, reclaiming Congress's spending authority is a logical starting point.
Now, with both parties acknowledging the need for reform, the hearing ultimately did not end with any conclusive solution, leaving lawmakers to continue debating how to best prevent future government shutdowns. But government shutdowns aren't the only thing legislators could be haggling over with no real solutions in sight. They could also be haggling over how to deal with the ballooning national debt and increased spending on entitlement programs. Well, joining us to discuss some of their recent research on the cost of the national debt to taxpayers and what options there are to deal with it is William McBride, Tax Foundation Chief Economist. Will, thanks for taking time with the states. Let's talk about the national debt, the trajectory you guys looked at from some congressional records and spending authorities. It's only going up.
That's right. Not a pretty picture, but it's kind of the same picture it's been for many years now. That's right. It's an upward trajectory on the debt and on the deficits. Where the new thing, I guess, is that we're entering new territory for the country. We're breaking different types of records every year. We're spending more than $1 trillion on interest on the debt. That's a new record. It's exceeding defense spending. Never done that before. We're hitting, as far as the debt to GDP ratio, we're about 100% now. The record is 106%. We'll blow through that in about 4 years, and just goes up from there. So it's we're certainly getting into a risky area with the debt and the deficits. Deficits are above 6%, going higher. We've never had that kind of projection out there. So very dangerous stuff right now.
And some of the information you guys have in your report, publicly held debt as a share of gross domestic product, a record high expected within the next 4 years, as you outlined. But looking further down the line there, Bill, you got 2056. It's going to rise to 175% of GDP. But spending, Will, is also going to continue to grow. Is there a way to balance this out?
Yeah, and that's the problem. I mean, we need to first, recognize the problem. What's driving the debt higher? It is spending, and the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, that tracks this and puts out an annual publication with new projections every year. A bipartisan organization serving Congress. They're very clear what's driving this. It is the big entitlement programs, namely Social Security and Medicare, that are growing faster than GDP and have been for decades and are projected to continue doing so forever. So that's kind of the definition of unsustainable right there. As it is, they've grown to such a level that these programs, the healthcare entitlements and Social Security together, are approaching about half of the federal budget. They were essentially zero back, decades ago, and they've grown to about half the budget. They're going higher. Interest on the debt is going to almost a quarter of the budget. So about 3/4 of the budget in the next coming years will be entitlement spending and interest on the debt. That is, it's leaving defense and everything else as a very small share of the budget. So everything's getting squeezed out, and we need to at least all recognize the problem that is the growing entitlement spending.
I want to talk a bit about some of the different types of taxing options there are, and whether just increasing taxes alone is going to be able to address this. But on these entitlement programs, yesterday here with the states, we talked about that announcement out of HHS, spending $1 billion for California and Minnesota, and you had another individual who was busted for $500 million of certain types of Medicaid fraud, and whether or not those dollars are going to be brought back or clawed back. Is entitlement fraud something that, if it addressed, could help stem this problem?
That's an aspect of it, certainly. I mean, because these programs are so big, and there's always a degree of fraud, or it's the broader categories, improper payments. Every year, the government, measures the improper payments, and it is in the, billions of dollars, hundreds of billions in some years. And it's the big ones are Medicare and Medicaid, not so much Social Security, but it's really the healthcare programs, the big ones, that have a lot of fraud, but more broadly, improper payments, payments going to the wrong people. And the government has a difficult time, getting that money back. So yes, that would help. It's not the only problem, but that would help.
And we'll talk about maybe some of the potential solutions there could be, but always seems to be the case with a lot of government elected officials. They may talk about the need to increase what they call revenue, what you and I may call tax, but go through some of the different taxes that are being proposed, that have been talked about for years, that may come up during political campaign seasons, and whether or not increasing these taxes alone is going to be able to solve this deficit issue.
Yeah, so every year we have proposals to basically tax the rich in various ways, and there's a whole cottage industry, if you will, of tax experts that come up with new ways to do that every year. We saw a lot of those rolled out under the Biden administration. New ways to tax capital gains. I'm not going to go into the gory details, but essentially different ways to tax the rich. We saw 5 years ago from Senators Sanders and Warren proposals to tax wealth at the federal level, which has never been done before, and it's probably unconstitutional. But those two senators are proposing wealth taxes once again as we go into the next campaign season for the next administration. Some other Democrats have supported those ideas. So putting aside the unconstitutionality of a wealth tax, we have looked at how much revenue could be raised from that idea, as well as, what are the economic effects and what are the effects of, the revenue at the end of the day, accounting for the economic effects and avoidance behavior, which is quite substantial in the case of a wealth tax, based on what we know where it's been implemented in Europe and other places around the world. We can see there's a lot of avoidance and tax planning around it. We looked at the sort of more, certainly the more constitutional ideas, simply raising top income tax rates. Several senators have proposed that. And we looked at, on the payroll tax, there's proposals to lift the payroll tax cap. It's currently, 12.4% that the payroll tax that applies up to a wage cap of $184,000. That's always the way Social Security has been designed. That's its major funding. And this proposal to just simply blow through the cap and apply the tax to all wages. So that'd be another tax on the rich. So we looked at, that. We looked at even ideas that we don't have in this country that other countries have. A value-added tax is a big consumption tax. So we just went through all the ways to raise a bunch of revenue, basically, constitutional or not constitutional, tried or not tried in this country. All the ways to raise several $1 trillion. And all of them have their problems, basically. All of them cause some degree of economic drag, reduced economic growth, investment, wages, job growth, et cetera, and avoidance and tax planning around the tax. So you don't, at the end of the day, accounting for all that stuff, you don't actually get the revenues that you hoped for, certainly that the advocates hoped for all of these ideas, but particularly for the most popular ideas that we're seeing proposed, the taxes on the rich, as well as President Trump's favorite idea, which is raising tariffs. We looked at, raising tariffs to the highest level possible to raise the most revenue. And we're not there yet, but we may be getting there, who knows. And that too has problems. It causes some degree of economic decline. And at the end of the day, that also has declining revenue gains over time, so that you can't actually solve this problem, even with these huge tax increases. What you would get is the continuing problem of fast growing spending programs, combined with now a slower economy, and one that cannot, as a result, support the revenues to pay for the spending that we have. So it's simply not the right solution. If you're not, the bottom line is, if you're not going after the source of the problem, you're just you're creating other problems.
I've heard it said that you're just throwing more taxpayer fuel into the fire and it burns right up. And for some reason it escapes me who said it, but it kind of goes along those lines of you talking about the avoidance of certain types of things. And somebody said if you want to change behavior, tax it. So interesting kind of thinking there. But again, all these different tax options you laid out, you guys looked at the individual income tax, the corporate income tax, the wealth tax, the tariffs, the payroll taxes, the consumption taxes, all of these different things. You're saying that even if they increase these in various capacities, that's just not going to be enough to address the growing deficit.
That's absolutely right. It doesn't come anywhere close. It would take a tax increase much larger than we have ever implemented since World War II, just to close what we call the primary deficit. Forget about the interest on the debt, just to close the gap between the program spending and the revenues coming in. And so even if you get over that hurdle, again, you have all these problems of, it has economic costs and avoidance problems, and you don't raise the revenue at the end of the day that you expect.
So Will, what is the ultimate conclusion here? What should happen in the Tax Foundation's estimation?
The research is meant to redirect policymakers and the public broadly to the source of the problem and the only way out of it, without a lot of problems and economic damage. And that is to address this entitlement spending that's growing on autopilot. Literally, it's not checked by Congress on an annual basis. It's not part of their budgeting process. Since the 1970s, it's been put on autopilot, and it goes up faster than the economy grows. So that's a problem, and it has to be addressed. And so that's really where this paper points to, is we really have to, probably in the context of something like a fiscal commission, which has been tried before, not always succeeded, but the last time we did it with Social Security, that's how we did it in the early 80s. It was a fiscal commission that adjusted the program benefits, and it raised some taxes. So it's probably going to be some bipartisan approach where there's some of both. But that's what is going to be required to balance the books at the end of the day.
William McBride, Tax Foundation Chief Economist, greatly appreciate you joining the States today, and we'll check back in on this issue and plenty of other things that the Tax Foundation looks at. And we'll be right back here with more from the States.
So let me be real clear. They broke the law by creating a fictional office and appointing someone to it during the week of a statewide election because they were more concerned about their own politics than complying with the law. And the district attorney started it because he wrote the letter.
That was Louisiana Attorney General Liz Muriel yesterday after charges she faced were dropped by a special prosecutor. She and Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry are calling for a federal investigation into that situation. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. Now, Muriel's indictment began with a law passed by the state legislature that dissolved the separately elected Orleans Parish Criminal Court Clerk's office and consolidated its duties with the civil clerk's office. Now, the change prevented Calvin Duncan, who had been elected criminal court clerk in 2025, from taking office, and placed the consolidated office under Civil District Court Clerk Chelsea Richard Napoleon. Now, New Orleans officials disputed that interpretation, arguing the legislation instead created a new combined clerk's office that needed to be filled. The New Orleans City Council subsequently appointed retired Judge Calvin Johnson as interim clerk and called a special election for that position. Muriel warned city officials that those actions violated state law. In a letter sent to the mayor, district attorney, and 5 city council members, Muriel threatened legal action to remove officials from office if they proceeded, and said she would act to prevent Johnson from assuming the clerk's duties. Now, those letters became the basis of a 16-count grand jury indictment charging Muriel with 8 counts each of public intimidation and malfeasance in office. The charges were dropped Wednesday by a special prosecutor after Williams and several council members asked that the prosecution be dismissed. But despite Muriel's indictment being dismissed yesterday, it was made clear Wednesday by her and the governor that there is still a bone to pick with New Orleans city leaders. The Square, Louisiana reporter Nolan McKendry, he reports that during a news conference yesterday dedicated to the incoming tropical storm, Landry and Muriel repeated and addressed their feud with New Orleans, raising the prospect of a federal investigation into Muriel's indictments and calling for future legislation to give the state greater control over those cities' courts.
A federal investigation is warranted. A state investigation is warranted. The Judiciary Commission should be investigating the judges that were involved. The bar, the Office of Disciplinary Counsel, should be investigating all of those lawyers that were involved. JP's a lawyer. So I don't know if the conduct that he engaged in shouldn't disbar him. Jason Williams' conduct, He should have his law license ripped from him. I can tell you this, if I would have engaged in that, all of y'all would be calling for my law license. I know that, okay? But for some reason, because it seems to be the other party, it's just like, mum's the word, it's okay. And so, no, it's not okay.
Now, Muriel identified a range of potential crimes she says stems from this indictment, including interference with a statewide federal election, civil rights violations, manipulating or obstructing grand jury proceedings, obstruction of justice, wire fraud, damaging public records, malfeasance, and public intimidation, the same offenses she has been accused of committing. Now, she argued that the indictment itself could constitute public intimidation because, in her view, she was threatened with imprisonment for carrying out her duties as Attorney General. Muriel also said her office is pursuing public records related to the case and intends to expand those requests. She questioned whether Williams's office was uninvolved in the prosecution, as he has maintained, saying unnamed people had told her otherwise. Now, she added that civil litigation could follow, calling the case a malicious prosecution. Muriel's been adamant from the beginning that her letters to city officials were lawful warnings about the consequences of violating state law, not criminal threats.
What I did was not a crime. It was never a crime. And I just want to thank all of the people, all of my friends and the sheriffs, the district attorneys, my colleagues, and everyone around me who showed huge support for me over this and expressed their outrage over what was happening in New Orleans, because it won't just happen to me. What they have done is open the door to something that could happen to anybody. And that's why it's not over. It's not over. And it's not because I'm angry. It's not because any of us want to retaliate against anybody. It's because what they did, it can now be weaponized and used against other people. That dismissal of that indictment today was not an effort to simply get us all back together to be friends again. First of all, you can't be friends with somebody who wants to put you in jail for 80 years. So, friendship is not really on the table. Mutual professional courtesy and professional working relationships, absolutely. We have always extended that to the city of New Orleans and its leadership, no matter how bad their decision making is. But this is about bad leadership and bad decision making in New Orleans, and we will continue to hold them accountable for bad decisions and bad leadership. And I'll continue to tell them if they break the law, and I will continue to do my job as Attorney General, and I won't be threatened by this action.
Now, she said personally, she warned city leaders not to move forward, including speaking with others and the mayor, and urged them to wait for the courts to resolve the dispute. The fallout could potentially carry a taxpayer cost.
I can tell you that I did a, back of the napkin calculation of how much I owe my lawyers right now, and it's close to $250,000. And I will ask to be reimbursed for that because I was acting in my official capacity. So that's what the city of New Orleans leadership, who put this thing in motion illegally and improperly, cost the taxpayers of this state. That's not my fault. That's their fault. And they started this. I want to go back again to what they did when they took it upon themselves to ignore my legal advice over and over again and appoint someone to a fictional office that they made up the week of a statewide election for the Senate primary, for the United States Senate. I took that pretty seriously. It could have undermined ballots, voting machines. If the person who had been appointed to this fictional office had showed up and started interfering with the staff and the voting machines and the ballots, it would have undermined all of the ballots in the city of New Orleans. That's how important this was at the time.
Now, Landry said lawmakers are expressing interest in convening a special session to, quote, look at ways that they can take more control of the court system in the city of New Orleans. He said he's got a lot of legislators wanting to go back into session. We'll keep an eye on that developing story out of Louisiana. You can get the headlines in your inbox at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more from the States.
Y'all are saying that this legislation is not enough, that this is just the start, and your constituents agree. They want more. More environmental protections, more protections for our air, more protections for our neighborhoods. We're asking you that after this legislation passes tonight, that you wake up and you get to work and you continue to find ways to protect Nashvillians from the harms that these data centers bring, the harms that AI brings to our communities.
I was a citizen addressing the Nashville Metropolitan Council this week about a measure to delay the development of a data center in that city. Now, this comes as the issue of data center development and their use of resources continues to be front and center across the country. And as President Donald Trump today announcing a pledge backed by some governors, legislators, and developers looking to protect ratepayers from increased electricity costs. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. The Nashville Metropolitan Council approved a moratorium on data center development until December 1st, and new regulations in light of opposition to a data center proposed near the Nashville Zoo. Now, more on this issue. Let's connect with the Center Square Associate Editor, Kim Jarrett. Kim, what are Nashville's regulations, and what is it that they did this week?
Basically, the scale back regulations that they have basically will say you cannot put a small data center within 100 feet of a church, a school, a zoo. They added zoo there. And then for large data centers, it's basically half a mile. I think that's 2,640 feet. They didn't do a lot, as the gentleman said, a lot of the environmental regulations. They were in some amendments, but because they're doing this moratorium until December 1st, they're going to be looking at more data center regulations during the time that they have the moratorium.
Now, they also discussed possibly taking over some of the land adjacent to the zoo. What's going on there?
So Atlanta-based DC blocks may have already purchased that land, but Nashville Mayor Freddie O'Connell wants to overtake that land with eminent domain and saying, hey, well, yeah, we need the land for different reasons. That way they'll own the land and that will stop this project entirely. We have talked to the company, DC Blocks, that is doing the data center. They didn't have any new information to give us yesterday after this Nashville vote. But previously they said, hey, we've been trying to work with Nashville. We're not trying to be a bad neighbor to the zoo or to anyone. This data center is also close to Fisk University, which is a private historical Black university. So they're saying, hey, we want to work with everyone. But looks like that Nashville is going ahead, doing the moratorium and trying to seize the land.
Kim, it's almost like there's an election just in a few months from now. So politics have definitely squeezed into this issue, even in Tennessee, not to forget across the entire country. But how has the reaction been from both sides of the aisle on this?
Well, surprisingly, both sides have tended to be on the same side when it comes to this one data center in Nashville. Marsha Blackburn, the U.S. Senator, who's also running for governor, she says, yeah, maybe we need to rethink this location. She traditionally has been kind of for data centers because of the tax revenue that they bring in. Now, Justin Jones, he's a Democrat in Nashville. He's saying, no, we don't need it also. He's saying this is not good for this area. So for a change, you have Democrats and Republicans in Tennessee agreeing on something.
Let's talk a little bit about, data centers in particular and what kind of impact some of the advocates say that data centers have on Tennessee. They claim that more than 68,000 jobs have been made, $625 million in state and local taxes, plus $10 billion added to Tennessee's GDP just in 2024. Has that been presented at all? And have you heard any of the supporters say, yeah, this is good economic development?
In Nashville, it's hard to find a supporter for this particular project that we're talking about that's next to the zoo, and it's largely because of the location. I attended an online webinar with the National Taxpayers Union recently, and they said, hey, data centers can be a boom for locations if they come in because the tax money that they're bringing in. In Georgia, there was discussion at a meeting yesterday that, hey, if counties would charge data centers franchise fees, that could eradicate property taxes in some counties in Georgia. So there's a lot of talk about data centers do have some benefit to the taxpayers.
Well, Kim, we'll definitely be talking more about data centers in the future, especially as President Donald Trump again announcing right about now a pledge to help ratepayers across the country when it comes to data center development. So thanks again to Kim Jarrett, the Center Square Associate Editor, for joining the States. We'll be right back with more. The price of goods continues to impact the economy as families look at their pocketbooks heading into another school year, and some see a lot of signs that any perceived break from increased inflation and economic pressures may not last. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop with more on the economic impacts of consumer prices. Here's Everyday Economics hosts, the Center Square publisher Chris Krug and PhD economist Orphe Divounguy.
Headline prices fell 0.4% from May to June, the biggest one-month drop since April 2020. I didn't get a whole lot of reporting, to be honest with you, but once you back out those falling prices, real spending was closer to 0.6 higher. And people got picky. Restaurants were basically flat, clothing was down, even grocery store sales were down. Is that a strong consumer, or is that cheap gasoline doing the heavy lifting in that period? We'll come back and we'll talk about the price of gasoline. But was it gasoline doing the heavy lifting while everybody was out lightening up?
I think so. I think so. I think it helped, which is exactly why the Fed is so concerned about inflation, right? So, with inflation remaining elevated, purchasing power continues to decline, and so and lower income households really feel the brunt of it. So the fact that gas prices fell a little bit is a positive. The fact that housing continued to help is also, it looks good, right? That rent growth has been somewhat steady. You look at asking rents that are now showing up in the average rents basically measured in the CPI. You're seeing kind of still that continued moderation. But I guess I'm worried. I'm worried that when you look at the recent events and what's happening in the Middle East, gas prices could start coming back up again. I'm worried about housing too, actually. Yes, there's been some kind of easing in the CPI, but now you look at asking rents, and asking rents are starting to firm up. You look at rents this year, this season compared to last year, and you see this, slight move up. Why? Mostly because builders pulled back so much that you don't have as much supply of apartments coming on the market, and without that, of course, the vacancy rate is no longer climbing. And you could start to see landlords, property managers regain a little bit of pricing power. And if that happens, of course, you start to see rents move up. So, there's pressure going on the opposite side, right? And I'm worried about that. And then you, of course, have the last but not least, fiscal deficits. Our federal government is still spending with reckless abandon, and that's putting pressure on it's demand. It's the demand side of the economy. So you got the supply shocks, and then you have the demand side of the economy combining for prices potentially still moving higher, right? And we're probably not going to see inflation return to that 2% target anytime soon.
So, I mean, you put a warning, kind of right in the middle of your everyday economics column that published today. We're recording this on Monday, July 20th, that the relief might be temporary, right? I mean, I think the vast majority of Americans who watch us have left their house in the last week. Gas prices did start to tick up a little bit. You said that rents are firming up again, and with oil climbing and the fighting going on in the Middle East, can you kind of walk us through the plumbing of that? I mean, like when the price at the pump moves, how does it ripple into everything else that the family buys, and how fast can this flip from a tailwind into a headwind for the consumer?
Yeah, I mean, if we could continue to see gas prices fall, I mean, that would be great, right? But I'm not sure that's what we're going to continue to see, given what's going on in the Middle East, and how things have changed so quickly. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, everything that gets to your store that you go to buy has to come from somewhere, right? Some truck driver had to drive it there, and that truck required gas. And so when the price of gas goes up, it affects so many sectors of the economy. And so it's such an important component that because it plays such a huge role and ends up in everything, right? That almost everything we purchase, right? So very important, every Amazon delivery driver that you get at your front door is coming on, driving a truck or a car. And so gas prices are going to show up there too. So very, very important that we see this, the energy shock dissipate. And it doesn't look like we're going to see that this year.
So zoom out a little bit for everybody. I mean, there was good news, in the June report, right? I mean, in terms of CPI, right? I mean, core inflation comes in at 2.6%. Shelter, as measured, was only up 0.1%. That's the smallest. I think it's the smallest single month-over-month increase in 4 years. Services were flat. Is the real trend here genuine cooling, or is this a little bit of a pump fake before rent and gas bite back?
That's it. I mean, I'm hopeful gas will come down, but the problem in the Middle East has to get resolved. Rent front, we're going to start to see rents firm up. That's my call this year. I think, it might not happen this year, but we're going to start to see, we started already to see rents no longer easing this year. The turn is likely going to happen this year. And I think by 2027, you're going to start to see rent growth kind of normalize by moving higher because it was below normal right now. So households are going to feel that. And yes, core inflation at 2.6%. I think that's great news, but how long is that going to last, right? If you still have half of businesses that pay the tariff talking about raising prices, if you still have conflict in the Middle East that could potentially result in higher gas prices, and at the same time you no longer have the rent disinflation, the rent disinflationary pressures. I just don't, unless we're at 2% or below before the end of this year, which I just don't think is going to happen, then how we're going to be at 2% or below in 2027?
Right. No, I know. It's just, it's such an odd time. I mean, you and I have been doing this show now for, I think, almost 4 years. And we've gone through some periods of time where it feels like the story just doesn't change. I mean, that this just feels like a slight reprieve that we're catching. And a lot undetermined.
Yeah, I mean,
so,
when you and I started really talking about inflation, like really focus on those numbers, we made that call that it was going to be very difficult to get back to 2%. even without the shocks that we got, there's still so much pressure pushing inflation higher, right? Yes, we have, the Fed basically has to remain restrictive, right? We talked about the Fed not cutting. The Fed has to remain restrictive for that reason, right? The supply shocks didn't help because, we were moving toward 2.5, 2.6%, right? And we're still there a year later.
Yep. Yeah, we sound like broken records. All right, we're out of time, Hey, make sure you read Orphe's Everyday Economics column each week in the Center Square. And know that this show is part of The States, our daily news magazine at the Center Square. You can see that on YouTube and across streaming platforms. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to the States. It's now time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country you can find at thecentersquare.com. After reporting about a now resigned state representative and allegations that Illinois House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch may have mishandled allegations against the lawmaker, new questions being raised about the speaker's own behavior, particularly toward women and staff. The Chicago Tribune reported details last week from an unnamed former staffer of former Democratic State Representative Harry Benton, who was accused of sexual harassment way back in 2023. Now, questions arose as to why Welch didn't take immediate action on the complaints made in his office until a second woman, this time a lobbyist, reached out with her own complaint about Benton earlier this year. Now, the Center Square Illinois reporter Sean Reed reports Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker asked about this Wednesday if he had confidence in Welch. Following this recent reporting, Pritzker signaled that Welch is listening to his caucus and explaining himself, though only behind the scenes for now.
If you are going to serve in public office, elected office especially, but appointed office also, you have to live up to the standard that the public should expect from you, very high standard. And people have fallen down on that job. Now, the speaker has a responsibility to be utterly and completely transparent about the situation, to make sure that he is letting the public know, as well as in particular his members know exactly what happened, and to the extent that he made mistakes, to own up to those mistakes. There is more information and more revelation, in my view, that must come. And indeed, I believe that the speaker should answer questions about that and be very transparent. He has pledged to do so. I'm just saying that these meetings are not over, the ones that he's having with his members.
Now, Welch's office didn't respond to a request for comment from the Center Square. Meanwhile, a group of New York landlords filed a lawsuit Wednesday against the city's rent control board, claiming its decision to freeze rents was a sham because the board was packed with Mayor Zoran Mamdani's appointees. The Center Square contributor Chris Wade reports from the lawsuit filed in state Supreme Court on Staten Island. Lawyers for the landlords claim that Mamdani went to extraordinary lengths to pack the 9-member New York City Rent Guidelines Board with loyalists, and then spent millions in city funds to fill the board's hearings with tenant advocates. Mamdani also had City Hall representatives give the board a special briefing on the, quote, true cost of living in New York City. The suit alleges compromising its independence and leaving no doubt what he expected of his hand-picked board supermajority. Now, in June, the rent board voted 7-1 to set a 2-year rent freeze for 1 year and 2-year leases or subsidized housing. That move, which goes into effect October 1st, affects more than 1 million tenants in taxpayer-subsidized apartments across the city. One board member resigned in protest over the rent freeze. Overstated and understated errors totaled $97.3 million, according to North Carolina Department of Audits about the Department of Public Safety. The Center Square managing editor, Alan Wooten, reports in reviewing messaging of the governor, General Assembly leaders, and public safety secretary. The state auditor found the department did not have adequate internal controls, including review processes, to ensure accurate financial reporting. The staff of first-time Republican State Auditor Dave Bullock identified 34 adjustments, 14 of which were material. The audit was for fiscal year 2025. Its purpose serves taxpayers through responsible stewardship and transparent reporting on public funds and grants allocated to prisons, juvenile justice, emergency management, and other programs. And Tennessee parents purchasing school supplies and clothing for children, they'll get a break on the sales tax beginning July 13th. The Center Square education reporter Esther Wickham has more.
Summer break is nearly over. As Tennessee students head back to school, parents prepare for their school supplies. Tennessee parents are getting a break on back-to-school shopping starting July 31st through August 2nd at 11:59 p.m. Many school essentials will be tax-free. This includes clothing, school supplies costing $100 or less, and computers priced at $1,500 or less. Tennessee's sales tax are the second highest in the country for both state rate and the combined state-local rate. According to the Tax Foundation, a nonpartisan tax policy nonprofit, the state's sales tax is 7%, second behind California's 7.25%. Now, the state of Tennessee's sales tax holiday has definitely been a tradition over the past 2 decades, almost 20 years, according to the Tennessee Department of Revenue. Quote, Tennessee's strong track record of fiscal stewardship has allowed our state to cut taxes and put dollars back into the pocket of hardworking Tennesseans, said Governor Bill Lee. Tennessee state officials say that this is just a small way to give back to their local community for their hardworking taxpayers and citizens as they head into the new school year. They just have a little bit more money in their pocket when they leave the store to help their kids make sure they have everything they need as they start the new school year.
Well, and that's just some of what America is talking about. You can get these and other headlines at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. And join us back here Friday to wrap up the week with more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from across the country, only with the states, powered by the Center Square.